Hey guys, Max92 and welcome back to another tryout. Today's tryout is on The Council. Now this is a game, I picked up this physical copy at some point when GameStop was doing some sales on pre-owned games. It was buy 3, get 2 free or something like that. And so this is one of the games I picked up. It was a while ago at this point. And I just remembered that it was on the shelf when I was scheduling for this month. And so I was like, oh yeah, I have that game. I should play that. So I tossed that on the tryout schedule for today. And so far, I have played through the first episode of the game. That took me a little over 2 hours and 45 minutes. This is an episodic game. It was originally released in episodes. There are 5 episodes. This physical copy has all 5 of them. Like I said, I just played the first one. And I believe, if I remember looking around, the first episode is free on Steam, potentially. So if you like what you hear in this episode, I guess, you can check it out like that. But we'll get into talking about the game now. So one of the first things that you'll notice, because it starts you basically in a story cutscene with a couple choices, is that the writing and the voice direction, I'd say, are hit or miss.
Stop! You're not getting anywhere with this, Von Borchert.
You know, I kind of get the same feeling, my dear Sarah. Listen.
And the animations, especially the facial animations, are kind of bad. It's put right up in front of you. It's like the first things you see in the game, and so it's going to leave a first impression if, those are things you're sensitive to. I think that the writing being bad and the voice directing being bad sort of leads to it being, it's more of that camp feel a little bit. So that I don't think detracts too far from what I've played. But the facial animations being bad is a pretty big detriment for me, I'd say, overall. Now, despite that, after going through, I don't know exactly how long, but a bit of cutscene things where you have a couple choices to how you interact with people, you get to the docks on this island, and I can't remember any of the characters' names right now, but you get to the docks on this island that's got the manor of this guy, and you're there looking for your mom, who's gone missing, apparently. And now you're basically you've been invited to this sort of secret society mansion thing, and you get control, and it's like an investigative social RPG. I don't know if that's a term. It's an RPG, but all you're really doing is navigating character interactions, and your stats affect how well you can navigate these character interactions. You get a choice of basically a class or an archetype at the beginning. There's 3 different ones, and I went with the detective. The other ones, I don't remember both of them, but one of them is occultist, and the other might be politician or something. Each of those also has dedicated skill trees, but you can spec into any of them regardless of what archetype you choose. The archetype you choose decides what skills you have access to at the very beginning, and therefore what stuff that you'll have to give more skill points into to acquire. I think the game does a really good job with its social RPG stuff, and the other game that I remember playing that had similar stuff was Call of Cthulhu, which I did videos about. I'll put a link in the card to the wrap-up. That's probably the best one to go watch if you want to watch that. I think this does a much better job with it, at least so far, than Call of Cthulhu did. This feels like it's really thought out with all of this, and I really like how its narrative is going, the mystery that it's crafting, despite, like I said, the dialogue writing, more specifically the dialogue writing, not the writing in general, is pretty hit or miss in stuff like that. I think that the mystery it's crafting is relatively compelling as a narrative hook. While the game has plenty of what I'd call jank to it, there's this sense that definitive care went into making this too. At some level, there's some issue with its development that likely happened that led to either maybe underfunding or not a lot of time, or just new developers taking on something maybe a bit too ambitious, something like that leads to some of the presentation being a little less nice compared to what you'd see in a AAA. Most AAA games, it's a bit if hit or miss in a modern era what the quality of a AAA is going to be. But generally, presentation-wise, those games are very high quality. It's the other stuff they tend to lack, where I feel like this is a bit of an inversion, maybe. However, you really never know with these kinds of games until you get deep enough into it that, like, you start seeing consequences to your actions and how that all ties together towards the end. So far, though, with some of the choices that you get in cutscenes, you basically get a choice between two things, but I feel like these choices are too binary. The biggest example that I can think of right now is at the end of Chapter 1, you get a choice with whether to go to your room with another of the guests of the manor or to go help a different guest and talk to them. And it doesn't feel like this should be a one or another, especially since I specifically ended the conversation with the guest that I was going to follow to see what they needed very quickly. I was like, okay, I'm not sitting around and screwing around with this. You're trying to trick me into something. And so I left. But that locked me out of the other thing, even though it really was only a few minutes that transpired here. So, like, the other person wasn't going to wait, but, like, it was a few minutes. They left ahead of me to go back to my room so I could make this choice. So they obviously were into waiting some amount of time. So it just doesn't... The binariness of some of these choices. Another example was previously in the game. You have to help... You talk to George Washington. George Washington, some other historical figures, like Napoleon Bonaparte, are in the game as characters. George Washington needs to look through another guest's room. And so he asks you to distract that guest and hold them in this salon where they're currently at. So you go down to the salon and find that this person is being harassed by a different guest, and your choice is to intervene or not. And this doesn't feel like a situation where it should be, if you intervene, you fail helping George Washington, essentially. That doesn't feel like the answer, especially since the door that this guest escapes through doesn't seem to connect up to the areas that would connect to the getting back to her room. It's just sort of like they feel a bit too closed off, probably to make it so that the game has actual, consequences to your choices, because if they are too vague and you can fandangle your way through them too much, it gets harder to add them all together in the end to give you a different ending. But it still feels like you're being railroaded a bit too much in these very binary choices. I just feel like there should be gradients to some of them. It's a situation, like I mentioned, where I think that this project likely had some fairly ambitious goals. It seems to want to be like a piece of interactive fiction akin to like an interactive film, but with a bit more player agency and actual like gameplay where you're interacting with things and doing more things than you would in some of the games that are dubbed interactive movies. Like, that's what it feels like, but I don't think they 100% get there. I'm not even sure they 75% get there in some ways, mostly because there's so much lacking in the presentation. I feel like it looks more akin to early Xbox One, PlayStation 4 console games than one that would have come out in 2018, which is 5 years into that generation. That's its biggest flaw, but also, again, the dialogue writing and those railroaded sort of binary choices that don't feel as binary. They don't feel like they should be as binary as they are. On the one hand, I am interested enough in seeing its narrative through to play more of it. But on the other hand, it's kind of a bit too weird. It's a bit too niche of a style of game. And I think that the rough around the edgesness in combination with those things is really going to make it something that I feel most people aren't going to be able to get that into. And so on that, I'm going to give it a fail ? I might revisit it at some point, either in a wrap-up of some kind or a wrap-up of Spites after I finished it, or maybe talk about it more in the follow-up at the end of the season, which is a long time from now. So maybe the first two things, but one way or the other, I'll probably talk about it again at some point to follow up on some of these ideas, because like I said, I think there's a lot of potential narratively for this to go somewhere and do something, and maybe even be really compelling piece of interactive fiction where you have a lot of control over outcomes and the consequences and stuff like that. But I've been burned by a lot of games like this that seem to be like, oh, you're gonna craft the story, you're gonna be a really important part of telling the story, and then the choices largely amount to nothing, or you get like a handful of canned endings. So I'm wary of it, but hey, if that's not interest to you, like I said, I think the first episode is free on like Steam and maybe other platforms, so it might just be worth checking out for yourself and seeing what you think rather than just taking my word for it. But that's my verdict as of right now. I'm just probably something that I wouldn't recommend widely to people, just because of some of the flaws I perceive in it. But I think that's pretty much what I had to say about it. It's what I got in my notes. So let's end this video. If you go down in the description, you'll find a Beacons.ai link. It'll take you to my places, Patreon, Bandcamp, Redbubble, etc. Click that link, go to those places, do what you do there. Like the video if you liked it, dislike it if you didn't. Subscribe if you want to keep with all the things I do on this channel. This show is weekly. I do other things less frequently. Stick around if you want to see those. Leave a comment. Have you played the Council? What did you think about it? What is your opinion on this style of game? There's a couple of different games I've played that are like similar to this sort of thing. So let me know in the comments what you think and share the video. That's it. Do the things. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!